Sebastian, welcome to the Way Champions podcast. You and I were just catching up before we got started here, and I think we have so much to talk about, even though we come from such different backgrounds in life. So, welcome.
John, I'm so fired up for this. I wrote a book about taking sports psychology and using it in business. And now I finally get a chance to talk to a sports person. So I've been looking forward to this.
This is great. Well, you know what? When it's almost like one of the things that upsets me, and your book is so good at this, is we call everything you're writing about in your book the quote soft skills, right? But they're not
Yep,
soft skills. They're the
not at all.
core of leadership, and I don't whoever named them soft skills totally missed the boat, and we're working very hard to sort of strip that title away and come up with a better word, aren't we?
Yeah, those are hard skills if you think about how much of the mind share they take. People, team leadership, it's the non-quantitative, the stuff you can't really measure, that's the hardest to deal with. So I'm with you, John. We just have to come up with a new name for them.
Yeah, and I think maybe also put emphasis on the idea that they are skills. And if it's a skill, it can be learned and developed. I think people are very closed-minded a lot about something like being a little more compassionate or being better at relationships or being a better listener. And they just say, "Oh, that's just not me. That's not my style." But if it's a skill, it can be learned, it can be developed, it can be improved. And we do a lot of work in the coaching world around this, but yeah, it's great to see people bringing this to the business world as well.
John, I want to give you my pitch on sports psychology because you mentioned soft skill might be perceived as, the stuff you don't really need to worry about, just focus on the results. And there's something to be said for being focused on results. But my pitch is that if you look at the research in psychology nowadays, and you go on Google Scholar and do a scan of the latest scientific research in psychology, only about half of it is about clinical issues. Clinical issues are super important, and that's how people think of psychology, dealing with anxiety and depression, for example. But the other half is on the positive side. How do people thrive? How do you achieve high performance? How do you achieve ultra high performance? My favorite anecdote is Felix Baumgartner. Does that ring a bell, John?
Yeah, the Red Bull skydiver.
Yeah, he got in this little capsule tied to this giant helium balloon, went up 24 miles, walked out and skydived. No equipment except a special suit. First human being to break the sound barrier. He was falling for 10 minutes, free falling for 4 minutes. Amazing thing he did. I don't really understand why he's not more famous, but I like to bring him up because Felix Baumgartner, throughout his training to do this unbelievable physical feat, he was coached by a sports psychologist,
Yeah,
a
Mike
famous
Gervais.
one, Michael Gervais. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then even the day of, he had Gervais in his ear, coaching him the day of. I love that example because then we can talk about how psychology is not just depression and anxiety and dealing with this. It's about performance. It's about thriving. It's about ultra high performance. It's about achieving unbelievable elite level results, like the Baumgartner example.
Yeah.
Usually I get people's attention when I start with.
Yeah. Well, it's such a great story because I mean, Mike Gervais has been on our podcast, and we've talked about things like this at the highest level of sport. It's not often technique or tactical thing that makes the difference. It's mindset, it's mentality, it's the ability. That one of my favorite recent stories that I've brought up on the podcast here a lot, and we were talking, you had listened, I think, to our podcast with Ann Walker from Stanford Golf, and we're
Yep.
talking about just this past April in the Masters golf tournament on the 18th hole on Sunday. Rory McIlroy has a two-shot lead, and on the 18th tee, his heart rate is 135 beats a minute. So
Yep.
it's really about how do I take action when when my world feels like it's crumbling, when I feel pressure, stress, anxiety, fear, all these things, and I still have trained myself to take action. And there's no way Felix Baumgartner, 24 miles up in the air, jumping out of a balloon, is not feeling all those things. And yet he has to take action or his life's in danger. And so the idea that training our mind is not something we should be doing really makes very little sense these days with what we know.
A big revelation for me studying sports psychology is that, you know what, pro athletes feel stress and anxiety. Now, sports psychologists will tell you need to reframe that as activation, as excitement. But I had a sports psychologist consult on my book, The Psychology of Leadership. We were talking about this. I was pretty stressed at work.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, look, pro athletes, they're all pretty neurotic. This is hard. This is very hard mentally, even if you're the best in the world. I find that fascinating because most of us go through life trying to suppress our stress, right? And of course, if you go into the danger zone, stress is incredibly bad for you, especially if it's chronic. But there's a certain level that will boost your performance. Now bring that to the world of business. You know, I'm not going to compare myself to a pro golfer or an elite, like world-class athlete, but I have to do things like go on live national TV to talk about our investment views in front of all my colleagues that I know are listening, my boss. I don't know what the questions are going to be. Yeah, my heart rate's 135, maybe even higher.
Yeah.
And so you realize how athletes do this and how they learn to do this. And then business people don't even think about it. Like they don't even hone those skills. I see that as an opportunity.
Yeah, it's an opportunity. And I think, you know, the issue with psychology was that for so long you went to the psychologist if you were air quotes sick, right?
Right.
But now in the highest level of sport, even though it might not be completely out in the open, it's much more out in the open that this is something you do to enhance what you have. And there was a very famous, I don't know if you're a rugby fan, but a guy named Dan Carter, New Zealand All Blacks legend. And he said, you know, when I started with the All Blacks, if you went to the psychologist, everyone said, "What's wrong with you?" He said, by the time I retired, if you weren't going to the psychologist, everyone said, "What's wrong with you?" Because you're letting your team down, right? And so this idea, you know, that this isn't something, you know, this is an enhancing thing. There's not something wrong. You know, it's just like if you went to the gym and you said, "I want to get faster," no one would say, "Well, why are you going to a coach?" Right? Well, this is just your coach. And I think it's important. And I love the fact that when you took the deep dive on this book, that you said you hired a sports psychologist, Daniel Zimmett, right? Zimmett, is that, am I saying his name right? Right? You hired a sports psychologist and spent a lot of hours with him on this. You even start this book with a story of him playing handball, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he's a fascinating PhD in sports psychology, but he has 40 national titles in the sport of handball. Our first discussion is him walking me through the best match he ever played. It's amazing because it's a match that took place 10 years ago and you remember where the ball was at every point. And there's a complete letdown because it turns out he lost that. And that's how he opened up the discussion on mastery versus ego. His ego was bruised, but it was his best match ever because he had never played at that level before. And from a mastery perspective, his game has just reached a level of improvement that surprised even him.
Yeah.
Mastery versus ego, huge topic in sports psychology. It should be a huge topic in business. Ego, quarterly earnings, you know, are you making money? These are all things that are important. Just like winning is important, you have to care about your game.
Yeah,
But
you have to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
mastery, I just gonna say, like, it's just like the athlete has to worry about their process, we have to worry about our process in business.
Yeah. Well, the words that Jerry and I would often use would be it's the difference between winning and competing, right? So winning is all about that goal or that outcome, but competing is about getting better. And his handball story goes, right? I lost, but what an incredible match. And we talk often the Latin root of the word competition, competare, I think it is, means to strive together. So the essence of competition is that you and I are pushing each other and we're both getting
Yeah.
better in the process. Now we've turned it competition into going to war and there's one winner and one loser, but really competing is about getting better. And I would think, in the business world, when you surround yourself with, bright, smart, great people, yes, maybe you're each trying to have your fund or something do a little bit better, your business do a little bit better, but you're making each other better in the process. Lionel Messi is better because of Cristiano Ronaldo, and Cristiano
Yeah.
Ronaldo is better because of Messi, and Federer is better because of, Djokovic, and so on and so forth.
I love this. And when you look at athletes after the match is over, most of the time you can feel the respect between them. You'll have some football players hugging, they talk to each other. You don't really hear it, but you see the camera on them and you can feel and see the respect because it's a partnership where they make each other better. I want to touch on something you said earlier, John, talk about Michael Gervais and the stigma around psychology and how in the psychology of leadership, I'm pushing for positive psychology, sports psychology, and how that helps you with your performance. Gervais, in one of his books, because I'm a fan, by the way, in one of his books, he talks about when he started as a sports psychologist, he was coaching a boxer and he was seen on camera. And his mentor, old school psychologist, emailed him and said, "What are you doing showing yourself?" Right? You're kind of you would seek professional mental game help in secret. Kind of coming back to the all black example you gave, but that really resonated with me. And the other thing I want to say, John, is we should all think, because this is exactly what you just said, we should all think of mental health the same way we think about physical health. Period. So you take care of your physical health. You go to the gym. You build habits. You try to eat better. You try to get more sleep. We should think of mental health the same way. And there's so many things you can build: positive relationships, be kind to people around you, learn mindfulness, go to church, whatever works for you. But just develop the same mindset. Mental health works the same way as physical health. There's a whole positive side to it, just like physical health.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting? If I said to you, or to maybe not to you because you've taken this deep dive, but to most people, I said, give me some terms. If I say, what does physical health mean to you? People would say like lifting weights, running, cycling,
Yeah.
eating well, sleeping well, right? And then if I said, give me some words that describe mental health, most people would say depression, anxiety, stress. So
Yeah.
we default to the negative when we think about mental health. Hence, we have these barriers of actually working on it. What if we said, optimism, calm, love, these sort of things?
Yes.
If that was our default, our view of mental health might be much better than something that needs to be fixed.
Yes. Mindfulness, learning to breathe. Even when I started the book, I still thought that the breathing exercises were not that useful. I thought they were overrated. But then with live national TV engagements for on the spot, this is normal for athletes to do this, but for the rest of us in business world, you actually learn to do it, use it, 4x4 breathing, whatever works, it actually helps. So it's all about having an open mind, John.
Yeah, and if the Navy SEALs are using it, and
Right.
arguably the most high performing team in the world, maybe it's something you should consider, right?
Right. I was talking to a high level, high performing money manager recently, and we're talking about coaching. And in our business, there is still some stigma about receiving coaching. For athletes, you say, do you want coach? Like coaching is part of the process, but not in business. It should be, but it's not. And then I told the portfolio manager that I was hearing some pushback and that I didn't think everybody would be open to hiring coaches,
Hmm.
especially experienced people. And he looked at me and he said, look, Rafa Nadal has a coach, so I can get a coach. I thought that was the right attitude.
It is the right attitude. And maybe, and this is maybe a little bit of an aside from your book, but I think it's important for some of our listeners. We have some very high level athletes who listen to this. And one of the things that people who pursue sport post college, right, the Olympians, and let's face it, most of them, you're not getting rich if you're fencing or curling or even track and field or something. So I live in Bend, Oregon, and one of our more famous athletes from here is a guy named Ashton Eaton. And Ashton won 2 Olympic decathlons, world record holder, wonderful guy. And he's been on the podcast a couple times. And he's in the business world now. And he said, when he retired after winning his second gold medal, and he goes into business, and he's working at Nike now. But his first corporate job, he would go into his boss and he would say, okay, what do I need to do better? Coach me up. And his boss just said, you know what, like, what a wonderful skill. Most people come in here
Yeah.
and they're afraid that I'm going to get criticized, and you're saying, no,
Yeah.
critique me, make me better. And so I think it's like really important for athletes listening. You think, oh, I'm 10 years behind because I pursued this sport, but actually the skills that you developed by being coachable, right? Never mind the discipline and the work ethic, and that make you very desirable in the business world, don't they?
I love that you bring this up because I can see it in my world. We'll go to a meeting, it's a tense situation. Maybe we're defending something, or maybe we're selling something, and we get out. And the ones that come to me and say, hey, what can we tweak? What can we do better next time? They usually, I find out, used to be pro or college level athletes.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. I see it in business. I'll tell you my biggest surprise when I started researching sports psychology. It's all about losing. It's not about winning.
Yeah, go ahead.
And what I mean by that is you talk to sports psychologists, you start reading the papers, and it's what you do with the loss. It's the mindset of learning from your losses, how you react. It's fascinating. It's like the whole field is like winning is like not an afterthought, but you don't learn as much from winning. I found that fascinating and really insightful for, again, our everyday lives or business.
Yeah, you share in the book the Roger Federer's commencement speech story. Do you want to
Yeah.
just share that again to our listeners here?
Yeah, look, he went viral. So I'm sure a lot of your listeners have seen this. He was speaking at Dartmouth and he looked at the students and he said, I'm, Roger Federer, one of the top tennis players of all time. He said, I've won 80% of my matches. But then he asked the students, what's the percentage of the points that I played that you think I won? It's a surprisingly low percentage. It's 54%. So Roger Federer, one of the top tennis players of all time, lost about half the points. Now, in sports psychology, if you learn to deal with this, you're going to be a much better tennis player. There's also a lesson that I like for investing. If you have a little bit of an edge, you don't need a huge edge against markets. But if you have a little bit of an edge, whatever you do, like a little advantage, but you use it consistently over time, it compounds to outstanding world-class results. But it won't if you don't learn to lose well and learn from your losses. The inspiring part of this is what Federer said next. He looked at the students and he said, the best in the world are not the best in the world because they never lose. In fact, they lose repeatedly, but they've learned to adapt. And then he looks at the students and he goes, that's my message to you. Adapt and grow.
Yeah. And it's such a brilliant message. And and your story there about those little tiny gains, right? I can lose Federer 46% of the points I play, I lose, yet win 80% of our matches, right? I'm not only then winning 54% of my matches. It's just I lose, I recover quicker from that lost point. And there was a pro golfer, Paul McGinley, told a story once. He was a Ryder Cup captain and a Ryder Cup legend for Team Europe, and he told a story how when he played college golf in the U.S. and he roomed with Jack Nicklaus's son. When he finally got to meet Jack, and he was wanting to turn pro, he said, "What's your best piece of advice?" And Jack Nicklaus said, "Get used to losing." Said, "I'm the best golfer who's ever played, and I lost 90% of the tournaments I played in. So you better get used to losing." And I think it's such an important. This goes back to this essence of competition, right? And this essence of like just getting better. And when we lose, right? When your team at T Rowe makes a mistake or has a bad time, you look at what you did far more critically than when you win, right?
Yeah.
And that's when you learn, right? So it's not winning, losing, maybe it's just winning and learning, isn't it?
I think to learn to lose well, you need to learn to differentiate between luck and skill. It was interesting in the World Cup after, I think it was semifinals, the coach for the England team was interviewed and he said, he just won. And he said, we played horribly. And that was a controversial kind of comment. But if you think about it, in investing, you can make really good decisions and get a horrible outcome because a war breaks out in the Middle East. But the opposite is true too. You can make really bad decisions. Like, I'm going to buy this meme coin, right? And then you make 3 times your money in 2 weeks. That's not skill, that's luck.
Yeah.
And I think about this in sport too. Sometimes the ref doesn't go your way. Sometimes the weather is not there. Sometimes you're just having a bad day. Sometimes you can't control what your opponent's having a wonderful day. There's all this, okay, we lost, but did we stick to our process? And did we do everything we could? And so those types of after the fact questions, to put it like, to give it like a dumb example for audience, just because I want to really bring the point and hear your thoughts, John. Let's say you and I go to dinner and we decide to drink and we drink each a bottle of wine. Okay. That's not a very good decision. Let's say I decide to drive home after. Horrible decision. And I make it home safely. That is a simple example of a good outcome with a very bad decision. Now, let's say you take an Uber, but the Uber gets in a crash. That's a bad outcome, but you actually made the right decision.
Yeah.
And so luck versus skill and the differentiation between the two and the self-awareness of it and examining your process. I know it's natural for you, for your audience to do this as athletes and sports people. But again, we don't do it enough in business. There's so much we need to do more like sports and business, I think.
Yeah. And that idea of outcome bias, I think, might be the psychological term for exactly what you just explained. It's such a hard thing, to go back to the Thomas Tuchel England World Cup example. Yeah, I remember that interview. I think it was after they played Mexico, and he thought they played poorly, but the mentality was great, right? They gritted out a win. But some of the controversy, and let's face it, the British press is going to turn everything into a controversy. So
Right.
that's what they love to do. But I think the point from some of his players is, sometimes when you grit out a win, it's not every day's not going to go well, right?
Right.
Especially in sports. You're not going to feel your best. You're not going to play your best, but champions figure out a way to make it work in that moment. And I think that is, some of his players were like, hey, but the point of today was to make it to the semifinal, and we did that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I love that game. That might have been my favorite game of the World Cup that I watched, just because it was so intense, and it was in Mexico City, and England's down a man, and they grit out this
Yep.
win under this incredibly hostile environment. Altitude, everything was against them,
Yep.
and they pulled it out. Like, I just thought, I watched that from the point of a neutral and going, wow, that was just so fun to watch, because that was mentality at its very, very best. When things are stacked
Yeah.
against you, what do you do in that moment? And I think that's one of the most important things in business and sport and life. It's going to be hard. So what are you going to do when it gets hard? And you can tell everyone, it doesn't get easier, does it?
No, it doesn't. And the finals of the World Cup was so uneven, and Spain dominated in such a way, like, didn't Argentina didn't take like one shot on goal?
No, not until
but
like
the
the end of overtime. Yeah.
but the thing is like, Argentina could have won. Like, a couple lucky moments, they could have won. Now, does that mean that if you're watching this, or if you're a player in the game, does that mean that we should play like Argentina? And that Argentina is more skillful than Spain? Not in that match, you know?
Hmm.
So it's luck versus skill. And I think it's normal in the athletic world to kind of parse that out, right?
Yeah.
But it's pretty important.
Yeah. No, I love it. Well, let's dive a little further into the book. You talk about these like psychological pillars, and this idea we talk a lot about, right? Just self-awareness, right? Leadership starts with self-awareness. So just unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, the feedback process is important in business. It's normal for you in sports. You have your coach on the sidelines, do this, tweak this. You seek the feedback, you want it. In business, it's uncomfortable, it's taboo, people hate it. We shouldn't, but that's just the way it is. If you want to be more self-aware as you reach the higher levels of leadership, it's so easy to just not receive feedback, or receive biased feedback, and kind of develop bad habits and not really see it. That wouldn't happen to an athlete, right? But to an executive, where people don't want to tell you really what you could do better. So the self-awareness, you do rely on others. Feedback is not perfect, though. There's a study that shows that, at least in the business side, on the business side, about 50% of the feedback you get reflects the attitudes and concerns of those giving the feedback,
Yeah.
as opposed to those receiving it. The other thing is, we do tend to focus on what we can improve and the negative side of feedback. We don't focus on the positive nearly enough. Because this is a sports podcast, I'm going to talk about Tom Landry and the Cowboys, Dallas Cowboys in the 70s. I don't know, John, if you've talked about this on your podcast before, but it's a famous example for feedback, because he would show in the video rooms the players basically messing up, and he would say, this is what you need to improve. But then he realized that this just made the players more anxious, and it just made them repeat their mistakes, at least
Hmm.
mentally. And by the way, mental reps is something I learned from sports psychology. They're pretty close to the real thing.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
help in training.
Yeah.
But then famously, Tom Landry switched to highlights. And then in the video room, it would be, this is what you did really well. That pass right there, do more of that.
Hmm.
And then the team improved drastically and won the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great story and a great example of what we fixate on, right? Because our minds naturally default to what went wrong. And as a coach, it's very easy to be someone termed as the deficit detective, right? So let me ask you, as a leader, right? You manage a lot of people and you manage $500 billion. Like you need feedback. How do you create an environment where people aren't afraid to give you, someone who could have say over their entire career trajectory, give you honest feedback, honest opinions in big decisions? How do you create that environment so people aren't afraid to do that?
In the book, I talk about Dr. David Rock. He's an expert in what he calls neuro leadership. He
Mhm.
basically invented the field.
Mhm.
He did a study about feedback and he realized the amount of stress it involves. He had people hooked up to monitors, heart rate, sweat rate, respiration, whatever equipment he had. And not only were people receiving feedback, experiencing a fight or flight, a stress response, but the people giving it too. But then there's one tweak, John, one little tweak to his experiment that reduced the stress for those giving and receiving the feedback by about 50%. Just this little tweak. What do you think it is?
Man,
You didn't think I would
I
put you on
don't.
the spot today, huh?
You put me on the spot, and I don't even know. I mean, I've looked into feedback, and like what one of the interesting things, and I'm deflecting here, but you're just gonna have to live with that,
Feel
right?
free to do it. I do it all the time.
Is this idea of the feedback sandwich, and where that, tell someone something positive and then a critique and then that, and this author Ashley Merriman, science writer, looked into that, and she's like, well, where did that come from? Where's that research? And she found that there wasn't any, and that actually that was invented by HR departments to make the person giving the feedback feel
More
better.
comfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would imagine this little thing has to do with psychological safety, with just the relationship between two people to know it. But I mean, I'm ready to write this down. So go ahead.
It might be a letdown because it's so simple. By the way, on the feedback sandwich, the problem is when people understand that that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they get it. Okay,
Just
I'm getting a sandwich here, so it's like that makes it ineffective.
well,
Yeah,
let me just say, and what the research actually says on feedback is that the more experience, the higher level the person you're giving feedback to, the more direct it should be,
yeah,
right? Someone like
yeah,
yourself who has all these years of experience, just tell me what needs to be done, right? I don't need you to butter me up. I know this. Whereas if you're giving feedback to a 10-year-old, it's not direct, critical, whatever. Like, you want to make them feel better about it. So it's really an awareness of who's getting the feedback that determines how it should be structured. But go ahead. I'm ready for my tip.
yeah. And I'm going to admit I'm keeping the suspense about how you decrease feedback stress by 50% a little longer. And I'm going to admit that there is something to be said for the sandwich or just mixing in positive feedback when you have constructive feedback to give. I work really fast. I walk fast around the office and I send emails fast when I'm doing emails. And sometimes I send constructive feedback. And I often forget that it's going to be more effective if I point out something that I'm genuinely grateful for in the work that the person did. It's so basic. I've been in the business 25 years, but I still have to remind myself to do it. It's not fake at all. Like these people, like someone has put together a 20-page presentation for me, and I'm pointing out 2 slides that are wrong. It's not that hard to say, hey, overall, this looks really good. So that actually helps. So how do you decrease feedback stress? You ask for it. So Dr. David Rock realized that when people said, hey, can you give me some feedback or what could I do differently next time? oof, the stress went down for everybody. So simple. Now, how do you foster that? You're the leader, you're the coach. Walk around and ask for it because people are going to see you asking for feedback. It was so funny. David Rock presented at our company, and in the sidelines, he was asking me for feedback. I don't know if it was just an act, but it was like, or maybe that's just like, so you model it, and then you encourage people to say, ask for feedback. You also, I'm curious if you do this in the sports, in this coach, in the high elite level coaching world, but in business, asking people for their self-evaluation is super helpful. It's a little bit of a derivative of asking for feedback, but if someone's self-aware and they come in and they said, I did this right, I did that wrong, oh my God, it makes the whole thing much easier because you already know where that they know, so you can have a constructive discussion. There's no element of surprise, right?
Yeah.
So whether it's encouraging people to ask for it or to write self-evaluations, it just makes the whole thing easier.
I think self-evaluations are critically important in sports. There's a very famous women's soccer coach, Anson Dorrance, and he said to us, one of the keys to being a successful coach, building a successful program, is to help your athletes' personal narrative get as close to the truth as quickly as possible. Right? If you want to get better, your personal narrative, what you're telling yourself every day, has to be true. Right? If you're telling yourself, I'm not starting because the coach hates me, I'm not playing because, the person starting's dad donated money to the program, I'm not starting because this, you're not setting yourself up to get better. So I would say the self-evaluation piece is massive because for someone working under you, like if they self-evaluate and they are so far off, it's going to be really hard to coach them up. But if they're like really identifying, these are the areas I would like to get better in, and you're seeing the same thing, well, here we go. Because now they're sort of asking for feedback in the right areas. Yeah.
It just takes so much of the stress out of it, John.
Yeah. 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 I love it. All right. You have another thing in there, which I really love, which is the value of relationships. And I would say that if there's one big theme on this podcast and the coaches we've had on here, Hall of Famers in so many sports, from basketball to lacrosse to soccer and everything in between, rugby. When you ask them, what percentage of coaching is X's and O's versus relationships, the answer is always about 80-20 relationships over tactics and techniques. And so just explore this idea of the importance of relationships in leadership, because no one cares what you know until they know that you really care.
Positive psychology has an acronym. It goes PERMA, P-E-R-M-A. P is positive emotions, and we're wired to follow positive emotions, to seek them, getting likes on social media, kind of sugar highs. IRMA is where thriving over the long run is fostered. E is engagement. So in sports, flow, getting in flow. R is relationship. M is meaning, and A is an accomplishment orientation. I bring up this acronym because when you ask about relationship, R is the most important factor in people's long-term happiness and ability to thrive. There's a famous study, if people in our audience want to look it up, the Harvard study, that spans 80 years, 3 different researchers, very detailed analysis of self-reported levels of happiness that shows that it is the number one factor in people's ability to thrive and basically self-reported happiness. So I'm not surprised that your coaches with a performance mindset think about relationships, because positive psychology also teaches you that it's not being successful that's going to make you happy. And credit to Sean Aker on this. He's a Harvard positive psychologist. It's being happy that will make you successful.
Yeah.
it's kind of reversing an equation. I talk about this in the psychology of leadership in my
Yeah.
book. So I'm not surprised that coaches talk about and focus on relationships, but of course it goes beyond that. It's how do you get the best out of each other?
Yeah.
And
And
as a
each
leader,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I would say and each individual, right? You have a team just like Steve Kerr has a team with the Golden State Warriors. And what Steve says is the way that I coach and what Steph Curry needs from me is very different than the 14th guy on the bench, right? The 14th guy, he's worried about, am I going to get another contract? Is this the end of my career? Steph Curry just needs someone to protect his time, right? He's set financially, he's whatever. Steve's like, when I talk to Steph, it's about, are you playing enough golf? Are you getting enough family dinners? Like, that's what he needs from me. And I think leadership is about, in sports, we would say you coach a person, not a sport. And I would, imagine in business, it's the same thing, right? You're leading a person on your team, and each one of them needs something different. And some need a hug and encouragement because they've never gotten any. And some need a little discipline because they've never had any. And the sooner you can recognize how you can serve each individual amongst that team, the better they're going to perform.
And what you point out is the coach's role in getting everybody to perform at their absolute best. And you describe a mindset where the coach sees this as their mission and they personalize it to get the most out of every person in different ways. The problem in business often, and this is the same for me in my own progression, is that the leader is also concerned with their own performance and how they are doing and how they are perceived. And if there's one lesson when you climb the ladder, is that it's not about you. It's less and less about you. It's about your ability to make the team and the individuals within the team better. That's another example, John. And I'm so glad we're having that conversation because that's another example of how sports can teach business. Because it's natural. Do we describe it for coaches understand that? Do all leaders in business understand that? Probably not.
Yeah. How do you work with underperformers, the people who aren't meeting the standards, the people who aren't showing up early or staying late or doing the work? Well, what's the process in leadership for getting them on board or eventually getting them off the bus?
Well, I'm a big fan of Dan Pink. He's a famous author and psychologist, and he's written about motivation. So the normal or, typical response to this would be some sort of carrot and stick approach, right? I'll threaten to fire them, or, sometimes you need to fire people. That's hard. I'm not good at it, by the way. Or they're not incentivized. Maybe I should pay them more. But Dan Pink would say that's probably not really going to help. And it goes back to something you said earlier when we were talking about self-evaluation and people internalizing their own development as opposed to blaming the coach and others. For an underperformer, there's clearly an intrinsic motivation problem. And that's how you need to approach it. Where's the intrinsic motivation gone? Why is it not there? And how can I foster it? And, it's not easy. It's not always visible. Someone could just have something going on in their lives, right? So having the type of conversations where you try to tease out, I can imagine a coach doing this with their athlete too, why they're not intrinsically motivated, And 70% of employees in corporate America are not engaged in their work. This is not a small issue.
Yeah. And if I remember Dan Pink's book, there's a certain point where the money doesn't matter, right? Like once you pay all your bills and you're making money and, you're comfortable, you have food on the table, you have housing, like extra money becomes less of a motivator than the relationships and the environment and a sense of purpose, correct? And you have a part in your book where you talk about like
Yeah.
choosing between two jobs, and it was really the deciding factor for you was, I want to go to a place where I look forward to coming to work every day.
Absolutely. And Dan Pink's proposal is even more radical than this, and he has research to back it up. I don't know if I'm fully on board,
Mm-hmm.
but his proposal, his hypothesis, is not only is intrinsic motivation superior to extrinsic, carrot and sticks and money, the extrinsic part, the carrots and sticks and money, is counterproductive in the long run. Now, I don't know because what you're signaling, according to Dan Pink, is that the task the work is not meaningful enough or intrinsically motivating enough, that you need to counteract that with money and rewards. So look, I'm not about to throw the rule book in business. I do still want to pay. Look, and athletes, they want to get paid for performance, but he's onto something, right? Is like a lot of things, it's a question of nuance and balance. The intrinsic part is much more important than most of us realize.
Well, we're recording this right after LeBron James just, signed with the 76ers, Philadelphia in the NBA.
Yeah, 8 million.
And he took less money.
Yeah.
And they asked him why, right? What do you need to do? And he said, I just love playing basketball. And money isn't what's driving me right now. I want a chance to win another championship, right? He's driven by that competitive spirit much more so than the biggest contract. And so often we see pro athletes go after the biggest contract, which fair enough, right? It's your right to do so, but they end up miserable on a miserable team in a miserable situation when you loved the Tim Duncans of the world, others who restructured contracts to surround themselves with better players so they could have a better team and better people around them. They seem to have a lot more, I would use the word fulfillment from the whole journey.
John, I want to put an exclamation point on what you just said. We're talking during my lunch break. I have a day job. I'm not making money from this. This is my best conversation of the week. This pure intrinsic motivation that we're talking here, right?
Yeah. I love it.
So I thought I'd give you my perspective.
I appreciate that, man. I mean, but what you just said, like, to me, right? I have a physiological reaction to a very kind compliment, right? Feelings equal function. You made me feel a certain way. Now I function better because of that. That little quick word, that little quick comment there, that carry me the rest of the day, right? I'll be mowing my lawn going, man, that's Sebastien. I like that guy. So
for those listening off the air, John and I talk about mowing the lawn in the book. You'll have to read the book to figure it out.
You have to read that, but that I do enjoy mowing the lawn, not picking up pine cones. All right, as we're coming to the end here, like, you've gone down this whole psychological rabbit hole for this book, and you dealt with a lot. You said, a lot of agents turned you down and said, stay in your lane, Sebastien. You're a financial guy, write about finance and whatever. What is something you learned from this, or what is something you've learned that you wish you knew 25 years ago when you got started out? What's the biggest thing that, if you could have given your, much younger self some advice, what would it be?
It's a tough question, but when you think about it, it's a simple and straightforward answer. The importance of relationship in everyone's lives. Never, ever, ever forget that. If you're career oriented, if you're an athlete and you want to do well, never forget the importance of relationships. It's not about being nice to everybody. It's about trust. It's about mutual respect. It's about having people close to you that you love. You feel invincible when you have a loving family. What's the worst that can happen? You go home and your kids and your spouse, they love you, right? So it's the one thing that I could have thought about more throughout my career, being super goal-oriented. So my last takeaway is, everybody listening to this, go find someone you love and give them a hug today.
It's absolutely great. A little gratitude, a little love, um, some kind compliments. Take the moment to send someone that you care about a text and say, "Hey, I don't say this enough, but dot dot dot," and
Yeah.
fill their cup. It's a great way to go through your day. And Jerry, my oftentimes co-host on here, he does this really well. He tells people to do it, but he's so good, and it's been amazing how many mornings I got up with a lot on my plate, and I just had a kind word from him, and just, whew, all right, here we go. Here goes the day. So, Sebastien, how can people connect with you? I know there's a website, psychologyofleadership.net, for the book.
Yep.
Get the book on anywhere books are sold. For those watching on, there it is, Psychology of Leadership. Great book, great read, and really enjoyed this. So, anything else? Any other ways for people to connect with you and uh, learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I just started Substack, and I write a story every Sunday with some positive psychology aspect of it. So you can find me on Substack as well, Sebastien Page.
Perfect. We'll put all those links in the show notes. Sebastien, I really, really enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise.
Congratulations on the book and all the great work you're doing. And hopefully in a couple of years, maybe we'll have a little follow-up to this and see how it's all going and what we've learned since.
Absolutely.